The story of Maytag begins in 1893 in Newton, Iowa, when a young Frederick Lewis, F.L. Maytag, joined with three others in creating the Parsons Band Cutter and Self-Feeder Company, which produced farm implements. Early on, F.L. Maytag became concerned when equipment began to break down in the fields during one particularly difficult harvest. It was then he decided that quality was the most important element in building a dependable product. He vowed then to never produce a product unless it was of the highest quality. In the early 1900s, FL ventured into the washer business, a sideline to supplement the company's business during seasonal slumps. This move, which demonstrated Maytag's commitment to financial discipline, led to the invention of the first Maytag wooden tub washer, named the Pastime, in 1907. It featured the same quality construction of Maytag's farm equipment. In 1909, Maytag acquired full ownership of the Parsons Company, and the Maytag Company was born.
I received a call to do a survey and evaluation of the buildings slated for demolition, which are 6 structures within Plant 1. When you look at Plant 1, it's in some ways difficult to differentiate individual buildings, especially in that center complex. So what you have to kind of try to look for if you want to understand those buildings is to try to pull them apart a little bit. And there are some elements that are very indicative of particular processes or periods of production. For example, the 1905 building stands a little bit on its own toward the northwest corner of that central part of the plant. And you can recognize it because it has what's called a parapet wall on either end, which means that the exterior wall actually rises above the roof line, and it's stepped in form. So when you look at that building, you can recognize that that's the early building because that was a particular construction style that was in use at that time. The other structure that's very easily identifiable is the building that was developed as the Gray Foundry and the sand casting structure. And that was to me, a very interesting part of the plant because as the gentleman who worked there for many years explained to me, it was the only plant that had a vertical production line so that the production started at the top floor and moved down, which is really a fascinating piece to me. It's very visually identifiable by the heavy cantilevered canopy that cuts out on the top floor and covers those sand casting bins. And so 2 of the buildings, at least of the 6 that will be demolished, had very large expanses of glass that cranked open. And so that provided light into the interior space, and it also allowed ventilation. So those would have been very hot spaces to work in. That was a development that very clearly reflected a technological advancement in construction and engineering that also paralleled the advancement in the washing machine manufacturing. As time passed and other technology allowed for interior ventilation fans and that technology of that sort, then those windows became less useful. And eventually, most of them were painted over because the heat coming in without them being opened became a negative. But they do point out to a very specific time period in terms of technological advancement, and that would have happened, in 1915 to 1925 era. And I think that the best way to understand really why Maytag was set apart from others is talking to some of those former employees. You can read a lot about how Maytag strove to be innovative, how in the early days when they were manufacturing implements that they really listened to their customers, their potential customers, and they developed products and implements that were specific to the market that they were catering to. And that above and beyond sort of effort transcended when they went into the manufacture of washing machines. I remember reading and having folks that I interviewed talk about the fact that the salespeople went out into the field. They took the washing machines to the farm women and they demonstrated them, and they made sure that that they understood that those products were reliable, that they would bring some ease to their life. And, farm people and farm women in particular had many responsibilities, and they welcomed those things that could make their life easier. Maytag was really smart about knowing how to go out to their customer to assure them that the products that they were making were specific to their needs, to make sure that they accommodated those things as they changed and that they were very reliable. The other thing that seems very clear is that Maytag, because it was a family business, it was a local business, and it was a family business for so many years, they were really invested in being successful. They were really invested in their community being successful. All you have to do is go to Newton today and the Maytag name, and their generosity is very apparent. And so, they spent a lot of time and effort in making sure that they were successful, the community was successful, and the people that worked for them were successful as well. And in thinking about that, it seems very clear that that was a very important piece of the longevity of that company and its amazing success over a long period of time. If you speak to employees, I don't know a lot of them, but every one that I know of and every news report that you ever hear talks about the devotion of the Maytag employees to that company.
I'm Dean Ward, and I had a number of jobs here at Maytag. I started out in the big plant and came over to this facility in 1955, had an office upstairs, was in inventory control. Then I went to purchasing, became director of purchases, and my last year I was in corporate purchasing working on a special project.
My name's David Gooch, and I started here in 1948, and I retired 47 years later. I had an opportunity to have a lot of real nice jobs. I worked for Mr. Curtis in the lab for a couple of years before I went into the service, and came back 2 years later and worked in plant engineering for a couple of years, and then I had an opportunity to go into the maintenance department where I spent the rest of my time.
My name is George Otto, and I worked my entire career at Maytag in process engineering department. Well, my profession is metallurgy. I was a metallurgical engineer.
My name's Lee Smolik, and I started working for the Maytag company in 1953. It was a very exciting time for me to come over, drive along Building 18, which is now was called the Tech Center until recently, I guess, and see washing machines. There were lights on all over the place. I assumed they were making wringer washers, I'm not sure, but there was manufacturing going on. It was an exciting time for me because I thought I can work for a manufacturing company here that's great, and it was great.
Everybody knew Maytag back then. I mean, that was a quality product that really had a good name all over the world.
Well, everybody seemed to be very interested in their job and trying to do a good job. I think there was a pretty good spirit of cooperation throughout the company.
We wanted to be the best quality manufacturer in the country, and we had programs to do that.
Quality was number one with Maytag, all those golden years.
The philosophy of the company and the working man was do it right. That's it, just do it the right way.
The building that was put up in 1926, there is 6 floors, 5.5, but almost 6. That was the area in which the wringer washers were assembled. Parts were made in this area. We went from the early days from a wooden tub to an aluminum cast tub to a sheet metal tub, welded tub inside of the skirt, using basically the same wringer rolls through those years. Well, when I was here, we had aluminum foundry, had a die cast, we had a maintenance area, Storage, where we were maintaining rubber supplies, as an example. On the second floor on down was the rubber department. We started making rubber parts because we couldn't buy the quality, so we started making those in the 50s. And then we started in Plant 2, but moved the facility over here. A little later, we were doing machining here, bar stock. We took sheet steel and made tubing. We had a die-cast, also a die-cast department, making parts for the transmission. And we put in a plastics department down at the far end, and that would have been probably in the early 60s, and that ultimately was moved out to Plant 2.
I had an opportunity to work, when I was in the lab, I had an opportunity to work with the foundries, both the gray iron and the aluminum foundry, and do a lot of testing of the products. I worked right here in this building. My maintenance office is right behind us here, and so I spent a number of years in this building. And the maintenance department was located in this building. So we were asked to do quality work all the time.
The thing that intrigued me about the company was that they did so many metallurgical operations within the house. Heat treating, machining, casting, powder metal, nuts and bolts they made. It was incredible to me, because my past experience was, well, they made one or two things and that was it.
I worked in facilities engineering and worked in different departments. And the one we're sitting in right now was the die-cast department. It was originally at Plant 2. I helped move it into this building in about late 50s, I think. And we made aluminum and magnesium die-cast parts here. And a little before that, well, when I came here, actually, we had the steam was produced in the steam plant, coal-fired. And in 1956, natural gas was piped into this area, and I had the engineering job of putting gas throughout the plants. And then a few years later, after we piped some of it, I put it in this department, in which we call the die-cast department. It was one of the hot areas, and we had to develop a lot of ventilation and some designs to help keep the temp down, because the temp around the furnaces would run 120 degrees, and we tried to help all we could.
This had heat treating and die casting. It even had a rubber department, and that fell under my jurisdiction too some of the time, which also made life interesting, because it was a whole new field to me. My job was, well, when there was a problem, say in machining or heat treating, metal forming, maybe the metals were breaking, go out, get a sample. Usually I'll look at it under the microscope, try to figure out what's wrong with it, and then go back to the vendor of the material, because we always bought them from somewhere, to get the problem straightened out. And we were usually successful. After a while, they didn't argue with us too much, because we had been there before.
When we were at our peak, we had 27 engineers and technicians. And in those golden years, we were always building something, and always adding and building. And so it was exciting that as we built up our engineering department, that was one of 6 engineering departments, but we had to do it at the facilities. So it was always interesting to hire some new people to do some new work. I remember clearly that we used to use our control system were relays, electrical relay systems. And one time, one of the tool engineers said to me, Lee, why don't you on that one system, why don't you put on a programmable controller? And I said, what is that? And I soon learned what a programmable controller was, because it wasn't long before we were putting programmable controllers on a lot of machinery, a lot of equipment.
In 1982, they closed Ringer production, and that's when they began to move some of the areas to Plant 2.
I think that's another thing about the people in the golden years. I think everybody tried to do everything they could for the company. They all understood that we were all in this together, and what was good for the company was good for each of us individually.
I guess the thing that I was impressed with, more or less, the spirit of cooperation between departments, because they got things done. They try to do the right thing.
In fact, I've always been proud of working here.
The time that I was at Maytag was great.
And people in the community of Newton talk about how difficult it is to lose that company. And it isn't just because it's a job, it's because that Maytag came to be Newton and Newton came to be Maytag. And I don't think that can be just about business, personally. But from a historic point of view, you can look through their archives, the archives at the Jasper County Historical Society, where most of the records of Maytag appear to be, and see that they made an effort to stay connected to their community, and that in part played in their business plan. The level of commitment to being innovative, to being reliable, to be something that you can count on. And if you're an Iowan, many of us have that kind of, we would describe ourselves that way, I think, kind of down home, reliable, honest, caring people. And it seems to me that Maytag in many ways exemplified that.
Well, I hope they will always remember that this is the home of Maytag, because this was so much of this town, and the Maytag family did so many things for this town. You know, the park and the YMCA and lots of things, and they're still doing things for it. I know I've been proud of being here and working here, and every chance we have, when we go any place and somebody wants to know where you're from, we tell them the home of Maytag.
Well, my hope would be the same as all of us who are remaining in Newton, and that is to see us make a comeback and see a lot of development. I don't think we expect to see one large company. When I worked for Phillips Petroleum in my first year out of school, I worked in a town called Phillips, naturally, and it was a one-company town, and I saw that as not necessarily a good thing. And while the Maytag company was so good to Newton over all of the years, it still had some reflection of being a one-company town, and there were some things that were probably not the best about that, but the company always did the greatest job to do its best part in Newton and do the good things.
Well, I think just for sentimental reasons, I'd like to see some other heavy industry come in. I like the idea of all the arts and that type of thing that's being promoted, because I think maybe we're a little short on that. And you can always use the community can always use that. You got a lot of people who want to see Newton thrive.
The role of the Newton Transformation Council has always been to figure out what would the community need, what does the community want to have happen, and then how do we find those resources to make it happen. We knew that we couldn't control the circumstances that resulted in the decision of the plant closing or the loss of the headquarters operations as well, but we knew we could control how we responded. So that first step in putting the vision together helped create a vision for the whole community and the surrounding area that gave hope. And that's really, I think, what a lot of what we've been doing in addition to identifying resources is just creating hope for those impacted Maytag employees and then the rest of the community in the surrounding area. Newton's future, again, is unbelievably bright because we've been presented some unique opportunities. One of those unique opportunities is, and has to be given credit to, the Maytag family and the Maytag Corporation because of their true sense of corporate citizenship throughout the lifetime of that company. They have left with Newton many assets that communities of similar size would love to have. And because we have those assets, because we have the amenities, a teen center and an aquatic center and a YMCA and many of these physical assets, but organizational assets, we are positioned in such a way that we can move our community light years ahead because we can take those assets, focus them on, again, what we want our community to be and make them happen. It's been just amazing to have people come in, especially the media, in the last week when coming upon the closing of the actual plant production, come in and be just, again, somewhat befuddled by the optimism that exists within the community. And again, I think that goes to the tenacity and the resilience of the community that it has always had. Hasn't always had to call upon it, but now that it's had to call upon that resilience and that tenacity and understanding where they want to go, they've risen to the call. And I think we'll see that Newton will be incredibly strong community and one where many people will want to become a part of that community, come live in the Newton area, come build their business there, and become a part of the community.